really something very different than any other Mind and Life meeting, and I think we all feel it in our hearts and understand at least a little bit, I think, how important this meeting is for Your Holiness and for the monastic community. And I think, speaking on behalf of all of us, I think we all feel a real gratitude to play a small part in the curriculum change that this event is really celebrating. Today, Your Holiness, I will begin to talk about neuroscience and also contemplative practice. On the very first day of the meeting, I said a few words and talked a little bit about the complexity of the brain and how it's probably the most complex piece of matter in the universe. After sitting through yesterday, I'm deeply humbled by my physics colleagues, and I think that neuroscience now is a much easier task than after knowing what my physics colleagues have to struggle with. So we'll see at the end of today what the collective judgment is.
More complicated because the brain specialist, in any way, she is dealing with mysterious or just consciousness. You cannot measurement. More mysterious, more difficult. Your task is more complicated.
So, Your Holiness, today I will first talk about two major systems in the mind, if you will, or two major constructs. One is emotion, and the other is attention. And I talk about these because from the perspective of Western science, there seems to be consensus that contemplative practice affects these processes. That is, it affects our emotions, it affects our afflictive emotions, it affects our positive emotions, and it also affects our attention. And so, from a Western scientific perspective, it makes sense to us to begin this project by focusing on these constructs which we think are relevant to the impact of mind training. And so I'll begin by asking, what are the key neural circuits that underlie emotion and attention? And then we will consider the idea that these circuits are plastic, meaning that they can be transformed by experience, and therefore they seem to be relevant for the opportunity to be transformed by contemplative practice. And then finally, I'll talk about the impact of different kinds of contemplative training on both emotion and attention, and I'll give one or two examples. And so that's the plan for this talk. I want to begin with an important figure in psychology and neuroscience from the West that has already been mentioned at this meeting, and this is William James. And in addition to his insights about attention, which we've heard a little bit about and to which we will return later this morning, William James also had some brilliant ideas about the nature of emotion. And I'd like to share William James's understanding concerning the nature of emotion, and that is depicted in this diagram to the right. And I'll walk through this diagram. If you look at the right-hand side of the diagram, it says sensory receptor. Those are the sense organs, the eyes, the ears. And William James's notion is that sensory information comes into the brain through the sense organs, through the eyes, through the ears, and so forth, and it goes up to the cortex through some relays, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but eventually it reaches the cortex, the highest level of the brain. And then from the cortex, if you look at the arrow that is denoted number 2, there is a line going from the cortex down to the viscera, which are our visceral organs like the heart, the lungs, and so forth. And so there are projections, there are connections. This is William James' view, but this part of it is clearly confirmed by modern science. So we know that there are pathways from the cortex that go to the heart, that go to the lung, that go to the different visceral organs. That is known, and that's not controversial. So,
Solinus is asking, are you suggesting that these visceral organs play a role in perceptual processes?
They play a role.
The visceral organ
They play a role in emotional processes. So the idea is that the brain is perceiving the senses, and then once the senses are processed, the information goes from the cortex down to the visceral organs and also to the skeletal muscles, to the muscles in our face, the muscles in our body. And then just to continue, the arrows that are denoted number 3 project back up to the brain from the visceral organs, from the heart and the lung, as well as from the skeletal muscles. They project back up to the brain. So for William James, what he argues about emotion is that when, for example, if we see a tiger in front of us, the sensory information goes up to the cortex. The cortex sends signals down to the heart, down to the lungs, down to the muscles, and we experience our heart beating more quickly, we flee, and then he says we experience fear only after those changes occur in our body. And so for William James, the changes first occur in the body, and then the signals from the body go back up to the brain and inform the brain about the state of the body. And then once the brain detects that the body is agitated, then the experience of fear arises. So in a very famous passage in William James's book, The Principles of Psychology, he says, we see the bear, we run, and then we are afraid. So this is a view which has had a very deep influence.
No, that.
So one occasion, some scientists used to told, fear develop, then the muscle goes leg, the blood
goes
more.
into them.
So obviously, anger comes, then blood circulation go hand, right to boxing. So that means, you see, the physical sort of change, this blood sort of, also the rushing, that's naturally is related to the heart and some other sort of body element. But trigger of that is here, feeling, fear.
The fear.
So I thought, you see, fear come first, then physical reaction come later. So you just opposite.
That's right. So this is William James's view. So which is right? So how can we test this scientifically? So I will provide one example of how this can be very rigorously tested to provide an actual empirical answer to that question, which comes first? Is there a way to tell? So in the West, Your Holiness, it's a little bit strange, but there are people who go to their doctors to receive injections in their face to make their face look younger. They receive injections of a molecule that is called Botox, in short. And what Botox does is it paralyzes the muscle for some period of time, and then it eliminates the wrinkles. And some people voluntarily go to their physician and get an injection of Botox to make themselves look younger. So we actually did an experiment.
你们是民就是么对啊？差。
So someone said that, so was saying that if you go too extreme one day, you might not even be able to close your eyes.
That's true.
그 블링크 소리 또.
You have to blink.
It's true. It's true. So we did an experiment. This is published in the scientific literature where we decided we can take advantage if people are voluntarily doing this anyway.
That's right.
What we did is we tested people before and then after they received a Botox injection to the muscle, one of the key muscles in making certain kinds of facial expressions, the corrugator muscle, which contracts during sadness, for example, very important. And we then were able to test the same person before and then after we eliminate the skeletal muscle contribution that goes back up to the brain. And so this is an important way to test William James's theory because we're not changing the brain directly. All that's changing is the signals that would arise from the muscles that then go back to the brain. So we can, at least for the skeletal muscles in some key regions, we can eliminate that feedback that goes back to the brain, and we can ask the question, does that change a person's emotional response? And the answer is, it does. It has some effect. And so that experiment, as well as several other experiments like that, suggest that at least to some extent, William James was correct. Where he was not correct is in thinking that all of it is due to the feedback. So it goes in both directions.
Now safe though. 자산해보세요. 그렇게 된 것이다.
So another important figure in the history of research on emotion is this scientist named James Pepys, it's pronounced, Pepys. And he was the first to actually describe a circuit in the brain that is important for emotion. Not just one location, but the interaction among a group of structures in the brain. He was the first to describe that. And his description is in this figure, and it includes a number of different parts of the brain, such as the hippocampus, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, another part of the brain called the cingulate. But all of the key parts of his circuit are enclosed in the dotted square. And notice that the neocortex, the highest part of the brain, is outside of that area. It's not part of the circuit that Pepys described was important for emotion. Now, this is very important in the history of neuroscientific research on emotion because it was suggesting that emotion is processed in parts of the brain that do not involve the cortex. And this was the classical view of emotion for many, many years. And then one of the things that changed that view, one of the most important things, were studies that were conducted primarily from individuals from World War II who suffered damage to their brain in the war. And one of the things that was found is that patients who had damage to the frontal lobe of the brain exhibited abnormalities in their emotion. That is, they showed certain kinds of emotional disturbances. And those were some of the first insights that suggested to scientists that in addition to the parts of the brain that Papes and others have described that lie below the cortex, that the cortex itself, at least certain parts of the cortex, particularly the frontal cortex, may play some role in emotion. And so what might that role be? And that has been the focus of a lot of basic research that we have conducted in our lab, but also many other scientists. And the modern understanding suggests that the capacity to regulate our emotions is importantly associated with the frontal cortex. And one of the things that may be different in humans than it is in any other species is our capacity to regulate our emotions. No other species can voluntarily regulate their emotions in the same way that humans can regulate their emotions. And we think that that probably has a lot to do with the growth of the prefrontal cortex over the course of evolution.
His Holiness is wondering, are you suggesting that other animals are not capable to the degree to which we can exercise regulation of
But otherwise,
our
we can
emotions?
notice some dogs, some birds. Although they are, I think, physical level, they want something. But mental level, they fear, they sort of little suspicion.
So His Holiness is suggesting there seems to be some ability to regulate. They don't, just keep a check on their instinct.
In that case, with the bird, if they want something, but they have some suspicion or wariness, the suspicion is likely caused by something in their environment that's right there, that's present immediately in their environment. So it may be some...
that is true. That's true.
Whereas in humans...
But still, you see, there's sort of differences.
Yeah.
The physical, biological factor is you want something, you're hungry, want to eat. But another sort of level, mind, warning, be careful. In an animal also you have that capacity, isn't it? So it's the two levels to it.
So to a degree, they do have an ability to sort of put a control over their instinct.
To a degree, although that control is in the immediate environment. It's not something that they can call upon purely mentally. It has to be present in their immediate environment.
He's not sure if that is necessarily true.
Also, a certain memory, not like human memory, 10, 20 years sort of memory, no. But I think at least a few months, if a bird or cat or some other mammal, so once they had some kind of difficult experience, then at least memory remain another, I think, a few weeks, a few months.
Yes. It is a matter of...
Yes,
it is a matter of degree. It's not absolute. It's a matter of...
There's no question, yes.
Yeah. And there's a very famous set of experiments that's been done in children where if you have a treat that a child wants, something, a delicious candy that they really like, and you put it right in front of them, and you tell them they can take that candy right now, but if they wait 5 minutes until the experimenter comes back, they can have 3 candies.
Yes, yes.
And this is a very famous experiment. And some children have the capacity to exert self-discipline. And
the age. Can you say the age of those children?
pardon?
The age.
The age of these children is about age 5 or 6 years of age. And one of the things that's striking about this is the variation across children in their capacity to do this. Some children are able to exert discipline very, very well, and other kids will look at the treat and then just grab it. And it turns out that if nothing else major changes in their environment, when they grow up and they're age 30 years of age, the children who were better at exerting discipline when they were young end up with much better outcomes. They have better ability to regulate their behavior in all kinds of ways. They are financially more successful. They're less likely to get into trouble with drugs. They have all kinds of more positive outcomes as adults. And so this actually is a very important insight because it suggests to us that if we can teach children to exert self-discipline in this way, in a more effective way, then we can actually benefit outcomes later on in life. And this is something that requires the prefrontal cortex. This is a skill which is clearly mediated by the prefrontal cortex.
So His Holiness is wondering whether the experiment has done, I mean here it's an incentive. So the children has been exposed to this candy and has been promised 3 candies if he can wait for 5 minutes. So there is an incentive. So the children knows that he's going to get more. So there is a sort of a anticipation and a joy.
So actually, a certain kind of motivation of positive thinking. So I wait 5 minutes, I gain better sort of
results.
result.
There is an anticipation, something that the child likes. But how about if we do the other way around, where the child is given a candy in front of them, and you just give them a warning that you should not eat it. You should wait for 5 minutes, and maybe even suggest some punitive consequences.
If not listen, some kind of threat. So out of fear, wait 5 minutes. Another one, wait 5 minutes out of volunteer, seeing some positive, seeing some benefit.
The benefits, no?
Yeah, so well...
So you mentioned that those is a child more disciplined,
no?
whole life becoming more successful.
Yes.
So some kind of discipline out of fear.
Can it work
not that kind of positive effect.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Your Holiness, and those experiments have not been systematically done to compare a motivation out of fear versus one out of a joyful anticipation. But there are other experiments that suggest that positive motivation will lead to more enduring and sustaining of behavior change than punishment. So I think that that intuition certainly is borne out by some other scientific evidence. So this is just another diagram of what scientists, some scientists have talked about as the limbic system, which is the system important for emotion which interacts with the prefrontal cortex. And one of the areas in the limbic system is this area here, which we've talked about before, called the amygdala, which I'll say more about in a few moments. But the idea that I want to emphasize here is that emotion, just like any other type of complex behavior, is not localized to any single place in the brain. It is distributed throughout a circuit where there are different structures that interact, and the activity of those structures interacting, according to modern neuroscientific view, is what is necessary for the emotion to arise. So it's not that it's located in any one area. There is no single place in the brain that we can say that's where emotion resides.
So not specifically in relation to this particular diagram, His Holiness is asking a general question about the brain mapping and the anatomy of the brain.
This kind of map.
Yeah.
So what age? I'm wondering this kind of sort of complete sort of form of brain
Emerges.
After
Conception.
conception.
In the fetal developmental stages.
6 months, 8 months.
Within the fetal development.
Yes.
It's in the last trimester, so in the final 3 months of gestation, major structures of the brain are formed. But and so all of these structures are present at birth, but they undergo postnatal development. So there's a lot of change physically which occurs in these structures up until at least age 25 years.
That's right, that's right.
So there's huge...
once Livingston after birth, mother's physical touch is the one major factor for enlarging brain. So which side of brain?
Well, again, the warmth of a mother probably affects many different areas of the brain, not just one, and it clearly influences the development of areas in the limbic system as well as areas in the cortex that play a very important role in emotion and emotion regulation. We know the evidence for that is extremely compelling. We know, for example, Your Holiness, that the unfortunate cases of human children who have been maltreated, and we've done some of that research ourselves, you see that the actual size of the frontal cortex is diminished in those children. So being subjected to either emotional abuse or physical abuse actually leads to contraction, to shrinkage of these areas. We've also done studies of children who have been raised in orphanages in Eastern Europe, primarily Romania, where they have suffered emotional deprivation, and they've been then adopted into middle-class families in America. And the age at which we test them is at about 12 years of age, roughly. And they've been in the orphanage for different lengths of time, but at least for 6 months and up to about 5 years. But then they've had at least 5 years living in a middle-class family in America, and what we see is that their brains are still very different when we test them.
So
that suggests that the restoration and revival doesn't take easily.
It does not take easily. That is absolutely true. It is very true, and one of the questions is how best to help those children to restore or to take over, have other parts of the brain take over functions that are impaired by the parts of the brain that are contracted. It's a very difficult problem.
Middle class
So it's just an aside question, nothing to do with your presentation. His Holiness just, thought this question. Since you talked about middle-class families adopting, what about millionaires? They don't adopt?
Very rare. Seems very rare.
Is it rare that they adopt?
I'm not sure. Does anyone know the answer to that question?
I think suppose the millionaire, so much money, they can adopt. 그래서
the 부급 adopt 재벌이야. 닝지도 계제.
재산가. So I'm just curious. You see, you specifically mentioned middle class.
Yeah. And it's in our data that we've looked at when we have advertised in newspapers for families.
Yes, I just wanted to tease you.
Even scientists, to millionaire, very polite. So not carry test experiment.
Solon is suggesting that the scientists are being more deferential towards the rich so that they don't subject them to experiments.
Yeah. We test all comers. But, when we advertise, Your Holiness, in newspapers, these families really want to participate in research because they have a lot of difficulty with their children. And they're searching for answers. So they have a motivation to participate. And we have many more people volunteering, many more families than we can. But the families that respond to our advertisements are all middle-class families. They're not from the very, very wealthy. So let me move on a little bit now. I'll skip this slide in the interest of time and just show that I want to introduce the topic of neuroplasticity just to say that neuroplasticity is not necessarily good or bad. It is neutral, and it depends upon what input we have. If we fill our minds with wholesome thoughts and warm-hearted emotions, then we can harness neuroplasticity for the good. But if we're exposed to adversity and to a lot of negative influences, that can have a deleterious, a negative effect on the brain.
So His Holiness was saying that he heard that as a result of exposure to a positive mental environment, such as the experience of compassion and love and so on, in fact give rise to a strengthening of neural connections as well as maybe even birth of new neurons. So does the same effect can be seen in the negative exposure as well?
It can, although the effect tends to be in opposite direction. So this is one example.
Emotion positive.
So given that there seems to be a suggestion that at the brain level itself, at the neural level, there seems to be preference towards more constructive mental, like emotions and so on, and there seems to be
although I would say the preference is early in life.
So His Holiness's question is, does that mean that even by looking at the brain...
Well, you mentioned some positive sort of because of the emotional feeling, some positive impact.
Yes. Yes.
So constant fear, anger, this negative emotion, negative or
damaging effect,
some kind of emotion are more negative.
Negative, destructive, damaging.
So that means the physical sort of particle, the small particle itself, you see, have some kind of because of the ability, distinction, what kind of emotion. Can
you say that? On the part of the neurons?
Yes, there are neurons which will, individual neurons. Christoph the other day mentioned neurons that respond to very familiar people. There are neurons in the brain that will fire only in response to positive input and other neurons that respond to negative. So there are neurons that make that distinction clearly. And there are circuits in the brain that are primarily dedicated to positive emotions and others more concerned with negative emotions. So there clearly are those distinctions that are made in the brain, absolutely. So, and this is an example, Your Holiness, from research of Bruce McEwen. You met Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University. He's a very, very eminent neuroscientist. And he has done some of the most important basic research. These are individual cells. And on the left, we have cells from a control animal and then an animal that has been under chronic stress. And what you can see is that the extent of these processes from the cell, these are the dendrites, they actually are fewer in number when the animal is highly stressed. And these are cells from the prefrontal cortex as well as the hippocampus. Those are areas of the brain where stress leads to a contraction, a diminished size, if you will. And the interesting thing is if you look on the right-hand side, those are cells taken from the amygdala, as well as another part of the prefrontal cortex, which we'll not talk about now, but let's focus on the amygdala. And you see the top is from a control and the bottom is from an animal that has been stressed. And what you can see there is that the branching is greater. And so the amygdala is an area of the brain that is particularly responsive to threat and to negative.
So how do you define control in this particular context?
Control?
Yeah.
Control.
Yeah. Control
It's in this particular context, it's an animal that has been just raised in a normal way and is getting fed properly, getting nourished, healthy.
And the stressed one is induced.
The stress is induced.
Right.
Yeah, and the way the stress is induced is by putting a predator near the animal to make the animal anxious.
그래서 멘탈이 더 숙철중도. more active.
So it seems that in
alert something. Alert.
Exactly. Vigilant.
Vigilant. So.
Yeah. So this I've described some about the circuits important for emotion. I'd like to now move on and talk a little bit about networks that are important, networks in the brain that are important for attention. And just as for emotion, we think of different aspects of emotion. We've talked about wholesome and unwholesome emotions. We've also talked about the capacity to regulate emotions. When scientists begin to work in an area, they begin to make distinctions. It's kind of like the Abhidharma with lists of mental factors. And so here it's much cruder, but some distinctions. And with attention in the same way, attention is not just one thing, but there are different attributes of attention. And what I'll show is that scientists have studied some of those attributes, and some of them can be distinguished in terms of which parts of the brain are most important for those attributes. So there are three types of attention that are denoted in this diagram. One is called alerting, a second is called orienting, and a third is called executive control. And I'll explain each of these. Alerting is if all of a sudden now there was a big loud noise, which like happened to us yesterday. Some people would turn their attention to the noise. That is what we mean by alerting. So something happens in the environment and our attention is pulled to that. We think of that as attention which is stimulus driven, and we say stimulus driven because the external stimulus pulls our attention toward it. So that's one kind of attention. A second kind of attention is orienting. If I were to tell you...
Orientation.
Can you explain?
Orienting.
Yeah, orienting.
Yeah. So for orienting, if I were to tell you that in just a second or two, I'm going to flash a stimulus just to the right of your eyes, and you know exactly where it's going to be occurring, and don't move your eyes. Keep your eyes focused ahead, but very, very soon I'm going to show a stimulus there. The orienting is the capacity to direct your attention not mentally, not with the eyes,
That's right.
but just
That's right.
mentally
That's right.
to that location. And you can do that with any sense. So we can be sitting here now and directing our attention to our right foot and the sensations there. That would be an example of orienting. Executive control is where we resist distraction and direct our mind to focus on one thing and inhibit the distracting influences that come from somewhere else. So, for example, if we were standing in a room with many, many people and engaged in an interaction, and if I heard my name being called, I would have a natural tendency to orient or to show an alerting response to my name being called. But if I focus my attention and remain in that conversation, that is executive control, being able to inhibit the distracting influence of the other sounds and keep the mind